Well, I can put the transfer shaft in here, the shaft that transfers the action from the cocking rack at the back of the camera to the shutter at the front. This is the front half of the shaft. They couple together, one slides over the other. Just trying to get the alignment correct there. Yeah, that's in place. Here's the shroud that covers that and holds it in place. Two small chrome screws. One of them's easy to get at, this one at the top. Just do that up very lightly. Its mate here, that's a bit trickier. It's easier to pull down the shutter release out of the way. Give you access to that screw. And tighten those two screws up. Alright, the focus scale ring can go in position. There's two tabs here and here. Make sure they're not trapped underneath it. I've got my alignment marks here and here, so I know where my screws go in place. Of course, the focus was very stiff on this camera. There's no guarantee that the focus ring hasn't actually shifted on the focus helical, and so that it may not be in the correct position. But we'll start where it was, and I'll adjust it if I need to. I've already had a look, and there were no obvious scars where the screw heads had bitten into the focus scale ring, so there's no telltale signs to tell me that that scale ring had actually shifted. Right, that's nice and smooth. And the coupling arm for the rangefinder, that arm has to come through here and gets coupled up at that point. So two screws, quite small these ones. Alright, both in place, so I can tighten those screws up. And at the top, the screw that goes in here is a post. It pulls the rangefinder arm forward. That in position. A touch of synthetic grease in there. That track. As I move the focus scale ring backwards and forwards, you'll see that post swing out. It works through the entire range. That all looks good. And as you collapse the front of the camera, you'll see that this arm runs right down back into the body, which allows that arm to escape. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to collapse the front of the camera. It would have to be that arm would have to be poking out the back. So that's that part done. We've got all the focus scale ring and so forth in place. I think I might put the door on the front of the camera now. I've got that here. I've already given that a bit of a birthday with a bit of polish, and that's looking a lot happier. I'll give that a buff with a brush later, and that'll put a bit of shine on that. But the door needs to go on, so there are 2 pivot screws for that. I can lay my hands on them. There were paper washers that sat in these 2 points. If they're missing, you can just make your own out of some cartridge paper. Any thick, robust paper would do. The sort of paper that comes in brown paper bags. Heavy duty brown paper bags, it works well for that sort of purpose. Of course, cutting washers is an art form all of its own, and I'm not going to show you how to do that today. I'm finding these washers, spacer washers, and I had 3 of them, which I have to say is an unusual number for one of these cameras. We'll see how we get on. So normally, put a touch of grease on these 2 areas here to do 2 tasks: to lubricate those pins slightly, but also because it'll stick these paper washers in position so that they're not falling off while I'm trying to assemble things. Take the body. So I normally hook the top one in place, then stretch out that front and clip the other one in position. That can be swung back against the body now. I'm looking at the space with this door, and it does rattle quite a bit in there, so it probably only eat all of those 3 washers. So I'll put the heavy one at the top. Line up the hole through the washer and through the door. Here's the pivot pin screw. See if I can get that run down into place. It's not running very smoothly. Here we go. And at the base of the camera we have 2 washers, which I'm going to stack one on top of the other and then slide in to position. At least that's the theory. See if I can hook those into position with the point of my tweezers. Line that up. Take our other hinge pin screw. Run that down. There's no play in the door now. And that opens and closes smoothly. So, I haven't lubricated the tracks top and bottom at the front here. or where the door connects to it. Just run a little bit in there. Work that once or twice, that'll distribute that nicely. So the door's on the camera, focus mount, focus helical, etc. is all back on there. And the next thing to do will be the film advance. Well, here I've got the film advance shaft, take up spool, it's metal bush. The shaft here I just want to lubricate, and you can see that that's sticking. That's just not smooth. It's not moving freely. I'm going to run some graphite grease over this. And work that on there. It seems quite good. If the springs have been over tensioned by someone, which is sometimes happens with cameras that have been serviced by people and they've over tensioned that spring, the return spring, to try and get the film advance lever to return nicely to position. If this is all gummed up with dried out grease and that's not remedied, basically all they end up doing is distorting that spring, in which case nothing moves smoothly ever again. So hopefully that's going to go for us. Here's the take-up spool and here's its bush. I'll put that in the base there. Hold that in position. Drop my film advance shaft down through there. That spring is tight, wanting to go through that bush, which tells me that it's probably been distorted. It did go though, which is good. And there are 3 screws that hold this in position. One run down there, check that that's moving freely, and it is. Put the other 2 screws in. Rotate that shaft slightly so that I can see the screw hole. And here's the last one. Alright, so I've got my 3 screws in position. I can tighten those screws up now. I think from memory they were loose when I started. And what have we got next? Let's have a quick look here. Oh yeah, the rewind button catch. We'll put that in place. And then the sprocket shaft, rewind button and so forth. So I can gather these pieces together. That'll do me. Right. So the catch for the rewind button. Probably lubricate the tip of this with a bit of molybdenum paste. That's where it acts against the advance lever. Oh, let's wipe some through the pivot point for good measure since I've got this in my hand. That sits here. Its return spring sits here. I've got grease on these tweezers, so picking things up that they shouldn't. And the shoulder screw that passes through the spring and through that lever goes here. If I can get the thing to stand up for me, I can get a screwdriver in there. Here it's started. Check that it's passed right through the spring, it's not trapped under there or anything. Do that screw up tight. Now I've got to get the tail of the spring lifted over the top of that lever there, which means I need my wooden block to stand the camera on. Now I just need to lift the tip of that spring back past this bracket. See if I can achieve that. Yeah, that went. Didn't even fight much. Yeah, take up sprocket can go in there. Sit that loosely in place. And the sprocket shaft itself, I'll lubricate the top part of that with some synthetic grease. The bottom part with some synthetic grease, that's where it runs through the body casting. Usually I'll put a wipe on the little pinion at the top too, where it couples to the film advance. That slides down through the sprocket and it's sticking on something. I think that screw hole in that thing was burred. Right, so line up the screw hole. Find the screw that couples that all together. Here it is. It's virtually identical to the ones that were holding the hinge pins, except this has got a longer threaded section. Do that up tight, and then we want our rewind button on the base. Usually I put a wipe of synthetic grease through the spring for the rewind button. The button passes through there. It's washer, and holding my finger on the top of the shaft, I can screw this into place at the bottom. And I'm running the sprocket backwards with my thumb there to wind that into place, and just checking that the shaft, the button passes through the washer, that the washer's not trapped underneath it. And I just need to tighten that up. So I'll just use my purpose-made pliers. Check that that's done up tight. And that's our sprocket shaft and so forth in place. Our film advance shaft's in place. And I'm going to get ready now to close up the base of this camera. So I'll start with getting the tripod socket back in place. The sooner I've got the base of the camera closed up, the sooner I can have that leather glued back, and the less likely it is that it'll get caught on something and get accidentally damaged. The leather on the base of a 2A cannot be completely removed when it's a one like this, because this boss here at the end is actually riveted in place over the top of the leather. The leather was put in first, then the boss was riveted in place over the top of it. Which means that in a camera like this, if you wanted to replace the leather, you have two choices. You would drill out the boss from inside and replace it with another one and a new piece of leather, or you would cut the leather to go around that boss. Anyway, that's done. The tripod socket's in. Those 3 screws should be tight. And we have a little shield that goes around the rewind button, and it's 2 brass screws. Do those up, and I'm ready now to glue that leather back in place. Before I glue that back down, I'll just wipe the body over here to remove any grease that I've managed to put on it. I'm looking at the state of the leather, that's all pretty good. Any tiny fragments there of glue that are floating loose, I'll just remove those in case they don't want to lie flat. That little piece can stay in place. That should be okay. So, some adhesive next. I will use this piece of adhesive, this piece of paper, and I'm going to transfer in the adhesive on it. Toothpick. Which you might say was the correct and proper way to do it. Not the rough way I normally do it. Just get that little flap of leather glued back down, and I'm applying the adhesive to the leather, not the metal. Using a toothpick allows me to get the glue exactly where I want it and spread it out so that it's a nice even layer, making sure I've got cover right to the edges. That was a good start, but it wasn't quite enough. The dry leather soaks up the adhesive fairly promptly. Right, just bring the toothpick round in to pick up those loose threads of adhesive so they're not dragging everywhere. Alright, lay that down into place. Okay. It seems quite good. It's making sure I've got that firmly pressed around that boss there for the rewind button catch. Right, I'll just give that a wipe, a bit of naphtha to remove any adhesive that's come over the edge. That looks good. So the leather's back on the base of the camera now. That part's secure. I want to put that tripod socket surround back in place next, I think. If I can find the two screws. I'll give this a wipe with some naphtha. It's good. Don't go mad doing these screws up, they're only brass, they're quite fine. They will snap if you mistreat them. Alright, so that's the base of the camera dealt with there. And we have all this done, so now I can start working on the top of the camera, which means assembling the film advance components.